Welcome to the Energy Sovereignty Project. Boy, we've had a interesting couple of days. So since we had a cloudy day today that started to break up and let some light through to the system, I thought we'd go ahead and take our first look at how the system handles certain modalities, certain ways that the system is set up through the application, and then we'll kind of follow that through the day and show you a little bit about what kind of feedback that the Tesla application gives you, and some ways that you can manipulate the system. So to start off with, we'll look at the system as it is when it kind of wakes up in the morning, and the system takes a little while to kind of power up and get to the point where it'll start to actually support things, and then we'll follow it from that time till about 4 p.m. when everything kind of balances and then the system actually stops producing enough power to really be meaningful. The way that the weather has been lately, it's important to remember it's been really cloudy, really rainy, and the way the system has operated is basically it's collected a little bit, but all of that energy has been gone by 5 or 6 p.m. The weather today has been a little bit better. Our goal tonight is today was to make it to 8 p.m. and 8 p.m. is when the rates start to fall off here. They fully fall off at midnight, but we're not going to make that, obviously. So as we look at these first couple of screenshots, it's important to remember that these first couple of screenshots represent just kind of moments in time. They don't represent where the system hit equilibrium. The only reason I'm showing them, I think it's important to see that they did involve elements that were kind of interesting to see how the system starts to make its decisions. So we'll go ahead and pull those up. So here's one of them, and in this one here, what you'll see that's interesting is that for a moment it was powering the home with solar, and I'm taking grid power, and again, remember, this only happened for a moment, but it did happen. So why? I don't know. I think that would be easily solved by simply adding a line of code that caused it to pause before involving the grid at all. And so then the second one we see, and again, this is a little after 10 in the morning. The system has finally gotten to a point where it's starting to exceed the consumption of the home. And remember, at this point, the batteries are still nearly dead. So at this one here, you can see that we're getting some power from the solar panels to the battery and also to the home, but the grid is still there, and the grid kind of pops up momentarily and shoves some power to the system, to the home in this case. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and it makes you wonder, well, why is the grid involved at all? What protections are being done on the software side to kind of really severely limit the grid's participation in all of this? So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to see. But again, both of these represent just that kind of momentary bouncing around that kind of typifies certain times when you're physically monitoring every second. You kind of notice some little anomalies. So let's not give that too much gravity. But again, the one important thing here is that the grid was involved. So as I watched, this, I kept wondering why the grid was there while the system was producing so much power, 4 kilowatts, and the home's only using 2.7. It seemed to me that in watching it that the reason for the bouncing around usually is when the freeboard is kind of close and all of that. But in this last one here, let's go ahead and what am I pulling up here? Yeah, so that's the 4.0. So in this one here that we're seeing, the thing that is interesting here is that it's showing 4 kilowatts. Home is using 2.7. And let's also talk about the setting that I'm using. I'm using the advanced setting in the software, and I have the section that says reserved for power outage set to 0. I'll show that screen a little later. And what that does is it says, okay, well, how much do you want me to store above all costs? You know, and so as long as that's 0, it should use the cost savings and make some determinations according to that. Doesn't seem like that's what's going on. And I also have the time of use plugged in, so it knows at what time my power gets expensive. It knows that power is going to get expensive at noon. So when we're looking at that 4 kilowatts, here's the other thing I'm going to have to really kind of take a look at, and that is this. So when I was reviewing the daily numbers from the Solar Edge inverters this evening before compiling this video, I noticed this. I noticed that though it's showing that I peaked at 4 kilowatts at 10, though the system did peak at 4 kilowatts, it doesn't show me doing that until around noon. So that was interesting. I'll have to take a closer look on that. The test that we have planned for today is to set the system so that it will do nothing but charge the batteries, to try and get as much charge in as possible. And because we started that before the sun came up, before dawn, my idea is that we'll go ahead and look for any disparity between what the Solar Edge inverter shows that we've collected and what Tesla shows that we've collected. I'm thinking that what we were looking at there may have represented just a few moments in time when I happened to be looking at the app where, you know, there were no clouds overhead or whatever, or maybe something that the Solar Edge inverter didn't record. It doesn't seem likely that Tesla would be inaccurate. That, you know, they gain nothing from not accurately recording the information. Could be a calibration issue. Again, we'll take a look at that. But I wouldn't expect that inaccuracy is something that they're doing. I don't think that they're trying to paint the numbers as rosy. So let's get back to it. Like I said earlier, the settings that are being used for the screenshots that you're seeing now are from the advanced menu. Again, we'll talk on that a little bit more in just a minute. But the result of using the advanced menu and the cost savings setting was this. So what we've got here is that you're seeing the solar being produced at 2.1 kilowatts. That power is going straight to the battery, right? And we've got a home consumption of 1.6. Now, even though we're exceeding the use of the home by a decent bit, we're still charging the battery, and we're pulling 1.6 off of the grid. So obviously that's designed to compensate for what the home is using. So it's basically the same condition that I see when I set the reserve for power outages above the level that above the level of charge that's currently stored in the battery. Like I had said before, then what the system does is it goes, okay, well, no matter what, I'm going to go ahead and charge the batteries because I'm below the amount that I've been told to reserve in case the power goes out. So I'm not really sure how this is saving me money. Ever since the 10 a.m. screenshot that we saw earlier, the system knows that it's in the final hours of my off-peak charges, and at noon I'll have to start paying more for it. So it also knows the current state of charge, nearly nothing. So there's no possible way. I mean, the system knows that, at least it has the information. By knows, I mean, that's what I mean. You know, it has the data available to know that there's no possible way that I'm gonna make it to midnight on depleted batteries. So if it was really trying to save me money, it would be charging the batteries at 10.2 kilowatts on cheap power right up until noon. So, oh, and that's another thing. So I mentioned that 10.2 kilowatts. For those that don't don't know a lot about the Tesla Powerwall batteries, there is a default kind of safety circuit within the Tesla inverters that when you're charging off of the grid, that it limits the power that each Powerwall is able to charge at, limits its charge rate to 1.7 kilowatts. And so then obviously we have 6 batteries, and so then the overall charge is 10.2 kilowatts. So that's where that number comes from. So that 10.2 kilowatts, when I was trying to decide, how many should we use for the energy sovereignty project? 3, 4, 5, 6? That was an important number that factored in there. I was getting information from folks that had these systems set up in Australia and Germany, and so I formulated my design specifications on that number. Let's not harp on that for now. We'll come back to that a little bit later. I guess one of the reasons I'm so pissed off about this whole thing of that it won't charge off of the grid or whatever is that I know what the system is capable of. I know that it's capable of waiting until that last minute, waiting until 10 in the morning. We'll talk about that later, about looking at weather forecasts and things like that. But here's what the settings look like in the advanced menu. This is the advanced menu settings. I have it set on cost savings. I have the reserve for power outages set to 0%. And then when you go in and you hit edit the price schedule, you get this. And this is the little graph that you can set up showing when your peak and off-peak times are. I'm going to try and look a little more into that so I can give a little more detail about the off-peak versus just the gray setting. If you move the bar, so there's 3 settings. There's the gray bar that's there just normally, and then you have your peak and off-peak times. And so I'll take a look at that a little closer too, just to make sure that I'm not missing something. It was also interesting that the peak time, you can only adjust it to 11:30. I don't know why that was, but that's neither here nor there. Is what it is. So at any rate, that's the settings. That's how I've got that set up. So I'm interested in this next screenshot that I took, simply because I found it amusing, as it kind of shows when you're dealing with a system that has AI, that's trying to take in information, when it's presented with something that matches, then you're at kind of a decision point. And so let's take a look at this. So at just before noon, we hit this situation where, and this was not a momentary modality here. This one was static for a while. I was watching it for, 4 or 5 minutes. It was just sitting right there. It was kind of interesting. So we're producing with the solar exactly the amount that the home is using. Well, so now we're into this situation of, okay, well, what do we do with that? What do we do with that? Do we send it to the home? Do we ask for some power from the grid? Do we, so you can tell that right now is really important as far as how the settings are. What is it trying to do? And buddy, it's still trying to charge those batteries. It's sending the 1.6 kilowatts that we're making from the solar to the battery, and then the 16 kilowatts from the grid. Well, so here's where that whole thing would have been interesting. So it's nearly noon. We told the system that our off-peak rates end at noon. Like I said earlier, 10 a.m. screenshot, the system should have been charging at its maximum rate. Had it done so, even if we'd waited until 10 a.m. to make that decision, it would have put 20.4 kilowatts into the battery if it had been charging at its maximum peak. So now remember that 20.4 number. We'll get to that at the very end. So, you know, again, what makes me angry about the screenshot is that it's obvious what it's programmed to do. It's programmed to only allow the battery to charge at the same rate that the solar is producing. Because basically we're getting that power from the grid. It could go either to the home or to the batteries. So it's obvious that it's been programmed to match that. That's disgusting. So, and here we go. Now it gets interesting. We hit noon. So now this is a little after noon. The system knows that it's now on peak time. Let's pull up the screenshot, sorry. So just as a screenshot that we had before, the system is in cost savings mode, yet it's still charging the battery and drawing from the grid. So what does it think it's accomplishing? You're more to the point. What do the people who programmed it to do this think that it's accomplishing? So remember that balanced decision-making screen back from 1155, you know, where it could go either way. Well, so here we see, again, because I told you, I'm following this, and it's, you know, basically it's a settled modality. This is what it's settling in to do. So here we see it again, same thing, only this time we're on peak rates, and playtime is over. You know, so what the hell did the cost setting do? Cost saving setting. You know, what did that do? So again, this wasn't a momentary modality. This was what it settled into doing. Charging the battery, 1.6 kilowatts, right off the grid, isn't doing me any favors. Sorry, it's just not. And so yeah, and I said it's charging off of the grid. Well, that's just an application of simple algebra. The graphic shows you that the power is coming in and it's supplying the home. That cute little dot that you're seeing, and obviously I haven't put a movie in, but that little dot shows you which direction all of the power is going. And it shows that going to the home. But that's not really what's happening. What's happening here, obviously, when you're seeing this screen come up, is that it's making a choice. I've got enough power to run the house. It could just shut it off and we'd be all good. But no, it's taking power from the grid. So that I found interesting, and it's, again, cost savings, not so much. So after I saw this modality kind of settle in and saw what it was doing, I made some changes. So the screenshot that I'm going to pull up now, I'm taking it off the advanced setting and I'm putting it to the self-powered setting. And the reason that I did that is I knew from experience what it would do. I knew from messing around with it the previous day that, you know, and also talking to Tesla customer support, that I had a crippled system. And so basically I took a pilot's approach. And when a pilot hears a loud bang and the autopilot disengages, the first order of business is keep the plane from crashing. So once you've regained control of the aircraft and the passengers stop screaming, you check your gauges and you make small calculated movements to the controls to figure out how much authority you've actually got over where the plane is headed. So that's basically the approach that I took here after Tesla customer support told me I didn't actually own the $30,000 worth of batteries I just purchased. I started to have a look at exactly what they'd allow me to do with them. So this screenshot here shows the self-powered mode, and you have this reserve for power outages setting. I set that to 0, and so now it's not going to try and save any power for the grid or for a power outage, and not reserve any. So now remember, when we use these exact same settings earlier on the cost savings mode, it was still pulling expensive power from the grid. So here's the result of that change. Boom. This is exactly what I would expect the advanced menu to have done at noon. I was actually hoping that I would see that. All right, we're pulling off. It's only allowing me to charge at the same rate as I'm producing solar. As annoying as that is, I was just kind of hoping that at noon something magical would happen, that it would go, at least I know that now I'm on expensive power, and then boom, do this. But no, it didn't. I had to do this basically manually. This is how the advanced menu should have operated afternoon, but it didn't. So even with this adjustment though, if you have the system and you make that adjustment, it's not actually all that intuitive. If I would have left this at, say, 10% reserve for power outage, it wouldn't have changed anything. It would have continued to manually charge the battery continuously on expensive power. That's, man, you know, I'm thinking, I can't help but think that that's exactly what SMUD and all the other utility companies expected would happen. That this is what they want to happen. Well, remember that we're talking about how you categorize things. That's definitely criminal. They knew that. They knew that, and they did it anyway. So anyway, so the next screenshots. Again, they don't mean a whole lot in the whole scheme of things. Remember, like before, look at the timestamps. These all represent just, really kind of minute snapshots in modality. As a matter of fact, the next two screenshots, I think, are within the same 60-second period. So that gives you an idea on just how much things kind of bounce around. And the reason that I'm including them here again is that they're annoying because they happened at all. It seems to me that when you look at these situations, that it just seems like that there was no real reason for them. So the first one here, 1.6 from the solar. Home was drawing 1.7. It decided, the grid comes in and says, I'm going to give you that 100-watt light bulb worth of power. And again, momentary, so maybe I'm just nitpicking this to death. But I would have liked to have gotten that from the Powerwall. It's speedy. It's supposed to be there. And so then we see this one here, next one. This one's especially annoying because for this brief moment in time when things kind of switch back, my solar is sending power to the grid while I'm pulling power out of my battery. Get your hand out of my pocket. I don't care that it was just a little. I think that this is just one of those annoying modalities where it's like, it could have probably been settled by a couple of lines of code that just says, okay, well, wait. In an instance where you've got power and the thing is set the way it is, that maybe you should just leave the grid out of it. Okay, so now we come to the modality that it's settled in at, this one here. So this is kind of what I would have expected from the cost savings mode. When you went in, it's like, I've got some battery power. I'm not told to reserve any power for power outages. How can I save the maximum amount of money? Okay, well, I'm going to use my stored power to get us as close to 8 o'clock or midnight as I possibly can. And then, deal with it on that level. Now, we've already discussed it's not going to let me power off the grid when it knows I'm not going to make it. It's not going to let me power off the grid so that I can make it to sunrise the next day. Talk a little bit about that later. But this is how it kind of settled out and ran for most of the rest of the day. So now that you've seen some of the modalities that you see on the application, let's take a little bit time to talk about artificial intelligence versus a human interaction, right? How smart can these systems get? What do we expect? And and ultimately, when do we need to take the wheel? The Tesla automobiles use a kind of a hive mind. They use this data collection of now hundreds of thousands of drivers. Every time they get behind the wheel, every time they put the thing in autopilot, it starts streaming data. And when the collision warnings go on, I expected pops some data from there. So all this data collection in this big picture way, I expect that Tesla is actually going to apply that to the Powerwalls eventually. It's kind of what I expect. So some additional resources are available. Things like the My Weather Radar app. I'll pull up a screenshot of that. That's kind of an interesting thing to look at. But it could pull data from there, and and even if you didn't have any of that, you'd still have things like sunrise and sunset and the angle of sun at various latitudes, depending on where the thing's installed, and then even some historical data from microclimates and things like that, like you get around the San Francisco Bay Area. And so there's a lot of data available that could be eventually plugged into the system. Yeah, let's pull up. So here's the screenshot from the My Weather Radar. There we go. And so then, in addition to what you see here, they know when the rates are cheap, because I put that data in from my manually from my utility company, so I know, when that occurs. But even if the app ignores all of that, I still have the ability to read a damn weather report. I do, all right? So, if I want to take manual control and tell it to, you better charge, then I want the ability to do that. I know that today is going to be a good day. I know that the next 2 days are going to suck. I also know that I have an elderly mother who occasionally uses an oxygen concentrator and that might not appreciate a protracted power outage this coming Monday in December with 90 kilowatts of battery power in the garage that Tesla won't let me charge. So my hope is that these videos get spread far enough that someone either at Tesla or SMUD will get made very uncomfortable over this, because I think that that's really the only way that this is going to get fixed. So end of my rant. Another sip of absinthe there. So by 4 p.m., the system had charged to a whopping 9%, and the batteries are starting to discharge. So let me show that. That's the screenshot for the main. When you pull up the app, this is what you see. It shows what we've got in charge in the battery, and then this next screenshot here. This is the power flow to finish out the day, where it's collecting what little it can from solar and supplying the rest from the battery. Eventually, obviously the solar contribution went away, and then we were running the home strictly on battery. And the grid's not involved. That was good. I watched. Didn't seem to come up. That was fine. All the entire time that the battery was discharging to the home, that was good. But by 7:30, battery was depleted. After the battery had depleted itself, I went back in and set the reserve for power outage setting at 30%. Now, again, from the feedback that we're getting from folks in Australia and the folks in Germany, when you do that, it should have started it should start the battery charging at midnight, but it won't. So, last thing, remember that 20.4 kilowatts was that that represented, along with maybe a little bit of that 9% that we had collected from the solar during the day. That represented the amount of power that it would have taken me to get from 4 p.m. to dawn the next day. Well, to sunrise the next day. How annoying is that? So the system knew that it would have been capable of doing that, and obviously it didn't. Anyway, so that's it for this one. Thanks for following in. If this is your first video, then have a look at some of the other videos, see what it took to get us to this point. I'll keep working on this, let you know what we find as we go. There's still a lot that I need to learn about how the software does what it does, why it does what it does, what choices it makes. Obviously, as you've seen, we don't have a lot of control over what the batteries do, so we're just going to have to try and work around that as we can as we present the Energy Sovereignty Project. Again, we're scheduled to kick off that on the first of the year. We may have to push that back a little if we wind up having some issues with getting the Solar Edge inverter to cooperate with the system. But again, we'll let you know how that goes, and hopefully you'll like and subscribe and follow along with this, and we'll keep you guys informed as the project moves along. So thanks for following.